All right, hello, welcome to Student Affairs Live. It's 4 o'clock, which means it's time for another episode of your favorite professional development show. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and we're going to have a great show today, folks. SA Live is hopping. We got a thunderstorm outside here in Columbia, South Carolina. Mike Severy, my guest, is organizing his office furniture, and we're going to have a great conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun. As always, folks, the hashtag for today's show is SA Live. That's right, it's in gigantic font. # SA Live. Tweet your questions, fire away, put some insights out there, and we will get a lot of stuff out there for you. Also, want to give a quick shout out to the Higher Ed Live Network. We are part of higheredlive.com. Tweeting today is Ardith, my intern. She's going to be tweeting us at Higher Ed Live. Tweeting your thoughts, your questions, any sound bites or links that you need to know about, she's going to be tweeting it. And I'm glad she's back from her vacation/internship in the Caribbean. Folks, this show would not be possible without our sponsors. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that actually happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're sending out a tweet with that link right now. So folks, I've been traveling, all kinds of stuff happening this month, and in just a little bit of time, I'm going to be going to the National Conference on Student Recruitment, Marketing, and Retention. It's coming up here in July. It's put on by Noel Levitz. It looks like it's going to be an amazing event. And I'm really excited because I think they're going to share a ton of knowledge that's going to be useful for this show, and we'll be sharing it with you as much as possible. Actually, we're going to host a tweet up during the conference, so really excited about that. So folks, my guest today is Mike Severy. He's the Director of Student Involvement and Leadership at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. I'm going to bring Mike on here so he can say hi to everybody. Hey, Mike.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Now you organized that entire bookshelf right before the show started, so that I'm really grateful for that.
That's right. I want it to look good for you.
Exactly. We'll get into this conversation here shortly. It looks like folks are watching, so looks like you've got quite the fan base, so I'm excited to talk to you in just a little bit.
Okay.
So folks, I like to do a little feature here on the show called Challenge and Support. It's my version of the weekly higher education news. I just returned from the ACUHO-I Annual Conference and Exposition in New Orleans. What an awesome event. So I'm a little behind on the news, so bear with me if some of this stuff you've already seen it or maybe you've already read about it, whatever. So first thing I found today was a really good blog post that came from Larry Roper. Larry Roper is chairing the annual conference for NASPA this year, in 2012, and it's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona, which, as you know, a lot of stuff going on with Arizona in terms of legislation. And Larry wrote a really interesting blog post entitled "Why I Chose to Lead," and Larry sort of comes at this as his feeling is that Arizona and other states, because it's not just Arizona, that will mimic that legislation represent our generation's Mississippi Delta. And I thought that his words were really insightful. It's a really good read, and honestly, take a look at that. I think it really frames things in an interesting light because some organizations have chosen not to go to Arizona for professional development purposes, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. Another article that I saw that I thought was really interesting was from the University of South Florida. It's going to offer transgender students, and we're not going to use the D word because that's a 4-letter word, but they're offering transgender students residence hall options. And I thought that there's a lot of gender-neutral housing options out there, but a lot of schools still haven't implemented gender-neutral housing. I know that Stacey Oliver and Catherine Magura had an article in the past edition of The Talking Stick about gender-neutral housing. So really cool stuff happening with justice with regards to residence halls. And I actually learned about some of this stuff at the ACUHO-I event. So a lot of cool things happening there. Read an article from Boston.com about undocumented students in Connecticut just starting to pay in-state tuition, which is really nice because it reduces tuition costs by as much as $17,000 annually for undocumented students, which is a lot of money, and it looks like that Connecticut is now among 12 states, which includes New York and Illinois, that actually grant in-state tuition to undocumented students, which is quite a boon in terms of education for those who are undocumented here in the U.S. As you know, I sort of look through the web all the time, surfing and whatnot, and I ran across an interesting web page on ACUI's web domain, and it was all about social media, policies, training, guidelines. Really, for higher education association folks who are getting into social media, it's a great read. It's a great read for how you can build community within an organization, within an association. A lot of really good resources there, so please feel free to take a look at that. I thought it was an awesome, awesome site. Lastly, I want to give a quick plug to an actual post on higheredlive.com that Seth Odell wrote entitled, "Is Facebook the Future of Roommate Matching?" And it's a really interesting post because it actually comes from a presentation that happened right after I did my session at Akuho Y on social media. TJ Logan from the University of Florida did a session about using Facebook for roommate matching using a service I believe called RoomSync. And it was just an interesting sort of dynamic about how folks are using Facebook not just necessarily talk with their friends, talk to their parents, their family, etc., but almost as an information portal. You're connecting with your fellow students about roommate options. You know, the schools app that Integral makes, like I mentioned earlier, they do a lot of stuff with Facebook as well. So it's really cool to sort of see Facebook being used now as an informational portal. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future with student information systems, whether or not they start to use social media, especially something like Facebook. So folks, I always do an unsolicited shout out of the week. Someone who has said something, written something, an organization that I like, a resource, etc. And this week's unsolicited shout out of the week, I'm really proud to say, goes to Larry Roper. Larry Roper, who I said earlier wrote that article for NASPA for the conference for 2012, is the VP of Student Affairs at Oregon State University. He is one heck of a leader. Follow him on Twitter. I think his account is locked right now or it's private, but if you can get in, if he does allow you to see what he's saying, it's very insightful stuff. He's a great leader in the profession, and he's the kind of guy that is extremely humble about his leadership, which usually, in my opinion anyway, those folks are the best leaders. So definitely giving the shout out and the love this week to Larry Roper. On a programming note, I've noticed from some folks on Twitter that there are some interesting Ustream links or ads coming out every once in a while with the show. Apologies to that. Looks like Ustream has kind of changed their ad model a little bit, where they're putting in ads during the actual live broadcast, and so we're going to look into some other solutions here, maybe Adobe Connect, something that we can use that's going to give us the same functionality but without the ads. One other thing that I wanted to mention today before we get to talking with Mike about leadership, and it was a tweet that I saw this morning about the joint conference between NASPA and ACPA in 2014. And the tweet was basically alleging that NASPA was trying to pull out of the conference deal and the contract and causing kind of a ruckus. And so I called up NASPA just to get confirmation of that, and it turns out that they had moved up the joint conference from 2017 to 2014 because the consolidation vote, if it had been successful, it would have been far easier because then we've had a joint conference because it would have been a single association. So now I think both groups are kind of looking it over, seeing what they're going to do, and now that there's no longer an option for consolidation, it looks like they might go back to maybe the 2017 joint conference, which is what would have happened had they been sort of on that regular timeline of, I think it's every 10 years or so. So I wanted to clarify that because I think it's really easy for Twitter to kind of get the rumor mill going and for folks to kind of get things out there that aren't necessarily fully factual. So as I said earlier, Mike Severy, it looks like Mike is looking at his resources because he's got a lot of notes. I guarantee you, I've seen the pre-show document. Mike loaded that with a lot of information. But as I said earlier, Mike is the director of student involvement and leadership at UNC Pembroke, and that is the topic for today's show. Mike, welcome to Student Affairs Live.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We're excited to have you. I think that this is a pretty popular topic. It looks like folks they're excited to see your books as well as to learn about the topic that we're talking about here today. Could you talk a little bit about what it is that you do at UNC Pembroke and just kind of give an introduction to your role?
Sure. I'm the Director of Student Involvement and Leadership here at UNC Pembroke. I have been here for 3 years now. I originally came in as the Director of Student Life, and within the last year we have transitioned to Student Involvement and Leadership. So we're taking a leadership lens to our work that is focused on a variety of different areas. We've got student organizations, leadership programs. Our programming board is out of our office. Student government is out of our office. And we've got our Distinguished Speakers Series, which is a major series that we've had for the past 10 years. And your traditional special events, homecoming, parents' weekend, family day, those types of things.
Wow, so what you're telling me is you don't have a lot on your plate.
No, it's been a pretty boring summer. Usually go home about 4:30 or so every day during the fall.
So, Mike, we're in student affairs. We talk about involvement all the time from a theoretical perspective, leadership development. But I think what folks really need to hear is sort of why leadership, why student involvement, why is it important? You're in the role, and I'm really hoping you could explain that to us, maybe just in a quick soundbite.
Sure. Well, I made the mistake one time of saying that pants are optional, and I have yet to live that down. But I think leadership is one of those pieces where it's not optional. My personal belief, and I will tell this every time I step in front of a group of people, is that students are developed over time through a series of meaningful experiences. And I think our role is to help students either find meaningful experiences or help them create meaningful experiences, and then thread leadership language, skill development, and understanding through all of those experiences.
Okay. Now, you have student government activities, kind of a wide range of involvement.
Sure.
How do you wrangle that all together in one office in terms of focus? Because sometimes, folks would be more interested in maybe the student government aspect or maybe the homecoming events piece. How do you keep your focus?
It depends on what time of day it is. Our programming board students, it's later. Our SGA students, it's earlier. But I think the key thread through all of it is that we're trying to empower our students to take responsibility for whatever it is that they want to do, help them grow. We're starting to talk a little bit more about personal branding pieces, which lead into kind of career development pieces and ship them down the hallway to Mallory Bauer. But it's also about giving them the tools to do whatever they want, whether it's in programming, student government, or some other interest area.
Okay. Now, it's interesting you talk about shipping students over to Mallory. Let's talk about collaboration a little bit. When I was at ACUOI, there were folks there who were talking about doing programming and leadership activities specifically within the residence halls. Very sort of captive audience there. Do you collaborate with your office? Do you work with other units on campus?
We try to. This is an interesting place. We're pretty siloed in some ways.
Okay.
We're very collaborative with the Center for Civic and Community Engagement. They actually are tied directly into our leadership and living learning community. So Christy Poteet, who works over there, comes in, talks with our students, helps them identify we require 20 service hours each semester for our students in that program. She helps them identify sites. If they want to lead their own program, they can do that. But we'll pull in different areas as well. We're partnered with housing, with our learning community. But we're not the experts on leadership by any stretch of the means, and we're trying to reach out to other places on campus to broaden our perspective and make sure that we're hitting all the niches.
Okay. Well, it seems like that's a common thread, too, in a lot of departments. Not necessarily the sole expert, but when you get everyone together, the community creates a lot of knowledge.
Right.
So I guess, what are the building blocks of a successful leadership program? You've been doing this for a little bit, you've been sort of assembling the team. What does that look like?
Sure. Well, we came into a really good situation here at UNC Pembroke when I arrived. The funding, we're a fee-funded office. So while other offices are experiencing state cuts, we've been a little bit immune to that. We're starting to feel that now as we find out about what cuts are going to take place. But we've been pretty ripe with funds, so that's a good spot. But I think a lot of it is building a concept of what leadership means across campus. And for us, when we took over the leadership responsibility, I think we were going to be small and kind of stair-step things along. But really just in passing, we had a conversation about developing our leadership living learning community. And literally on a walk across campus, in a matter of 5 minutes, we went from no residential component to our leadership program to a full-blown leadership program with housing components and service components. At the beginning, if you had asked me if that's how I wanted to start a leadership program, I would have said, no way, that's way too big of a chunk to pick off. But I think what it's done for us is that by starting as big as we did, we had some responsibility to the rest of campus that if we're going to go big for these 36 students, what are you going to do for the rest of campus? And then what do you do once those students kind of grow out of your leadership program? So we've been kind of pushing. Becca came on last year and it kind of grew that way. Symphony Oxendine is going to go to graduate school at UNCG this fall, so we've got a position open in the office that will try and hire somebody with some leadership background there so we can continue to grow and reach out across campus with our leadership lens.
So I was thinking of a couple things here. When you said that you have your budget sort of maintained itself, it's pretty steady. You haven't suffered any sort of major budget cuts. What does that mean in terms of your budget then? What does that allow you to do that you think that others can't do, or what are some of the ways that you've been able to use those funds proactively to help with just the programs you're doing with your students?
Right. Well, as I mentioned, with the learning community going bigger to start, we did the same thing with kind of the general approach to our students across campus. We brought in Ed Cabellin as part of a leadership speaker series. Ed was our second speaker that came in. He came in and talked about leadership and technology. And our first speaker, we weren't sure if we wanted to just kind of, again, step up and go, but we brought in Curtis Zimmerman, who many of you know, does leadership type talks, and he's been in the NACA circuit for quite some time. And we talked with him. His price has gone up from what I remember bringing him in when I worked at Mount Union College, and we debated about whether or not we wanted to spend that to start and have only 10 people show up. And so we had a good conversation with him. It's like, you can either start small and build up, or you can start big and go, wow, look what people did, and what are they going to bring next? And I had a conversation, I can't remember where it was, but with Marcy Shankman, and I had mentioned kind of a bait and add approach, is that our students look for the entertainment piece first. We say we're going to have a leadership speaker. We're not going to get anybody to show up. So we put Curtis out there as somebody that's going to eat fire. And he did that, and it was one of the last things he did in his show. But rather than a bait and switch, it was a bait and add. You're still going to get the entertainment, but we're going to feed you the leadership pieces as well. So again, it set the expectation bar really high, and we need to continue to backfill for students to meet what we've set up for expectations with them.
Absolutely. Well, it reminds me of Rutgers a little bit. You're bringing in the equivalent of Snooki to get them excited, but you're finishing with Toni Morrison.
Right.
So one of the things you said was that you serve X amount of students, and then the challenge is how do you serve other students, and when those 35 or so, and they sort of grow out of the program. One of the things we talked about before the show was not everyone can be a leader, and so how do you work with that, when that sort of mentality of obviously there's only so many president roles in organizations to begin with. How do you work in sort of a umbrella way to create leadership opportunities even for students that can't be in official leadership positions? Sure.
Well, and I think that's our responsibility as leadership educators, is to give students language about leadership. I think if we frame leadership purely as a positional approach, that there are a finite number of people that can participate in that process. And I think the key word in that is that leadership is a process, and what is your contribution to that process? Certainly, if you kind of view a continuum, there are certain people that will never engage or contribute anything, and they can be on your left side. But at some point, students are getting engaged, getting involved, and contributing to something on campus. And to what degree they are contributing is part of their conversation about how they're participating in the concept of leadership and the process of leadership. So it's about changing a student's language. Like, we'll get students that come into our learning community, yeah, I've been a leader in high school, I've done everything, and I'm just going to take a break and let other people do it. And that's very much a role perspective. And secondly, I don't think it's a very limited life skill perspective as well. I don't think leadership, as I mentioned earlier, is ever going to be an optional skill. To some degree, if there's somebody else in the room, there is a leadership relationship happening there.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying too is that leadership isn't just a checkbox. You don't just, you serve for a year in some role or some capacity, check it off, and then you're done for the rest of your life because you've got that on your resume now.
Right. There's a half-life to knowledge and experience, and you need to continue to gain knowledge and experience as you go.
What are the sort of, I guess, most popular leadership programs that you've put on at UNCP?
Sure. We have been a host, probably the first one that comes to people's minds when they look at our programming is Leadership. This past May, we've hosted Leadership for the fourth time. So that has been a good program for us. We've struggled the first year. We struggled. You know, it was billed as a trip to the beach. We go out to Oak Island, which really is on the beach, and but it's also an 8 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night experience, and you know that's not really a trip to the beach, so to speak. Uh, we grew it second year, grew it third year, struggled with follow-up pieces in both of those years. And I think we finally moved this year to a place where we can talk about leadership um, as the process piece and not a product. Like one of the pieces that they do at leadership is develop a vision. And we got really hung up on the follow-up pieces with students in their vision development, that when they came back to campus in the fall, that they'd kind of given up on their vision. And then it's like, okay, so what? Um, and we tried to talk intentionally this past May about it's not necessarily about the vision that you develop, that product. If you want to continue through with it, you're welcome to do that, and we will support you on that. But what about the vision development process did you learn that you can apply to other things on campus, or other things in your community, or at home, or in your places of employment?
You think
So
it's,
kind of
yeah, it's sort of like sustaining energy almost, sort of keeping
yeah.
that momentum going.
Yep. Yeah, there's always a retreat buzz. You know, we've noticed that
A
students
retreat,
really,
did you say a retreat buzz?
a retreat buzz. You know,
Okay.
everybody comes back. You know, it's the big love fest the day after, or any sort of intensive experience, and our students like that. But how do you sustain that, and what are the pieces that are important to continue on, and what can you let go of?
Absolutely. One of the things that I think that I'm intrigued by with your office, your department, is that your use of technology. You know, you brought Ed Cabellin in. Ed, of course, was the first guest here on Student Affairs Live, and we talked about social media and a little bit about you know, digital identity development. What are some of the sort of technologies that you see that you're using in your office, or that you see coming down the pipe, sort of the future of leadership and tech?
Right. We're learning as we're going. We try new things out, and if they work, great, and if they don't, they don't. We're in the usual places: Facebook, Twitter, and on our blog. Um, and somewhere along the line, we started to have a conversation with some other folks across campus to get back to your, you know, we collaborate on campus, but we're also looking to collaborate off campus. Some of that started with a conversation: do we partner with another institution for leadership, and you know, bring in, not, you know, a lot of schools will partner locally, but we want to partner with somebody further away to expose our students differently. And one of the things that we're talking about, and I met with Cindy Kane and Joe Janice and Chris Conzen and Becca Obergefell the other day, about a Facebook leadership experience where and this is, the numbers are based on technology capabilities, but each one of us would contribute 4 students to a leadership experience utilizing Facebook as the platform, maybe Google Plus. You know, we used Google Plus the other day for the meeting, and we felt that there were some possibilities there with the integration of chat and the video pieces. But using the platform to deliver leadership as we normally would. Cindy's identified a grant that we might take a look at to address some travel pieces, so we can pull, you know, kind of as the incentive at the end of the day, that students can actually meet face to face. We've submitted it way in advance. You know, the cart is way in front of the horse on this one, but we've submitted it to NACA, so we're, you know, it's one of those things where putting your money where your mouth is.
Right, you have to put the submission in there and say it's been a great program so far.
We were pretty vague in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, what that brings up to me is that idea of, used to be you've got students on campus in the brick and mortar space, and you're doing leadership and involvement programming with those students. And then you've got students, maybe they're just solely electronic campus, you know, they're web-based learners, they're taking courses, you know, distance-based. But now it's kind of a mix, right? It's not just, you know, these separate things. There's kind of a blended model. How do you think leadership's going to evolve to support students that are never actually setting foot on your campus?
Right. I think ultimately it's a relational experience, and how that relationship is facilitated doesn't remove the relationship component. You know, it's like our interaction here on Skype. I still see you. It's the barrier is not as obvious as it is with Facebook or Twitter, where we're not having that, it's an asynchronous relationship. Right now, we're having a synchronous relationship. How do you, and that's part of my struggle with some online education. It's like I'm taking a class right now that's on Blackboard, and I hate the asynchronous piece of it because I want to know what you think in the moment. I want to hear the intricacies of your voice and see your movement and your body language pieces so I can react to that and probe further for questions. And if you do that at 10:30 at night by putting up a blog post and then I respond to it and then you don't see it until the next morning, some of the interaction pieces are missing there. So I think as technology goes forward, we still need to address the relationship pieces of leadership and how are people going to get connected as real people and not just avatars or a name in a stream.
It's great, exactly. We have a question here, it looks like,
Sure.
From Rachel, who is my former tweeting intern here for the show, and I think it's a great one. How do you engage student leaders with technology while also being sensitive to access and socioeconomic issues?
Right, that's a great question. The engagement of technology on our campus has been interesting for a couple of different reasons. One, we've kind of been out in the forefront with pushing students to use Facebook in a different manner, use Twitter in a different manner. I'd blush at some of the things that our office feed will collect from our students and what they're sharing on there. I don't, and I've made a conscious decision on some of them, quite honestly, to not follow them. But part of our responsibility, again, as educators, is to teach them how to use it effectively. It's not the what did I eat for lunch kind of thing, the usual suspects, but how do you grow and develop your personal brand and have those conversations. The accessibility piece is actually a pretty hot topic for us. We are under the gun at UNC Pembroke a couple years ago, and I don't know the full story about it, but Office of Civil Rights is on campus for some accessibility issues. So everything that we do is under the microscope as far as accessibility is concerned. And I've got a Page-Moto page up on our Facebook page that we need to pull down because the JAWS screen reader doesn't read it correctly. And we've talked with Page-Moto, and at this point, they don't have an alternative to make us 508 compliant. But those are concerns. Everything that we look at, do our Facebook photos, do they have captions? Do our videos have captions? Are we providing all of our events, our major distinguished speaker events, we've got an interpreter without question at the event interpreting whether or not we know that somebody's going to be there or not that needs the interpretation services. So those are particular things. The other piece that we are struggling with, that as far as socioeconomic background with our learning community, we're providing them with laptop computers so they have that particular access. UNC Pembroke, on a more broad scale, is actually in conversation about providing or having a laptop or a computer requirement across campus. And that gets into the even bigger problem of what's going on financially. It's like our campus has got a 15.6% state budget cut coming at them, plus students and their need to use private loans and what absurd interest rates that they're going to pay there. How do we get them access to those particular resources? And for the most part, I think it's easy to make the assumption that students have smartphones and those kind of things, and then we'll run into we've got 63 students on our Facebook group for the learning community. There are 62 people in the group, and one person doesn't have Facebook, and you admire all the connections that are happening in that space, but then you've got this one student that hasn't connected there, and how do you remember to include them when we start back in the fall? So it's a good question. I don't think there's ever an answer. I think the key is to be aware of what your privileges are and how what you're doing may or may not be including people.
Well, and I think, Mike, when you say that the Office of Civil Rights came to UNCP, where are other professionals getting this knowledge, these resources, or just the awareness that it's important? Because it seems like that happens a lot, right? You've got a school, something happens, and then they make the change versus
right.
Let's be proactive. And I think that I don't know if maybe it seems like that's a great session topic right there for you all. You know, maybe you should just present a couple more sessions at these conferences.
We haven't submitted anything for ACPA yet, so and that's how we'll have to defend travel. It appears that if you don't present, you don't go. So
exactly. Hey, folks, it looks like on Twitter here that people are getting hit with the Ustream ads. As I mentioned earlier, Ustream is changing their model a little bit. They're trying to get viewers to pay money to go ad-free, so I apologize. We're going to be looking into a different solution here that will hopefully be ad-free, so you don't get these mid-show ads that break up the show, because we have no idea when they're actually going to appear, so apologies for that. So Mike, I guess the question then for me is, what is success, and how do you define it, and how do you measure it?
Depends on who you're talking to. You know, that's the holy grail of what we do in student affairs, is that you may never see success as you define it, particularly with leadership development. You know, it's the whole planting the seed idea. You know, when you talk to upper administration, depending on who you're talking with, it's number of people in a program. Certainly, I think it's important to define your learning outcomes from the beginning and assess those as you go through and see if you've hit the mark on that. So we'll define success in that particular way. But I don't think we're going to necessarily see the impact of our work immediately. And if we do see the impact of our work immediately, then I wonder how well we are pushing people along in their development. You know, certainly you want to see progress. You don't want to just stretch them beyond where they're capable of going. They snap back and never go. But you kind of want to pull them along as they go and continue to grow. But you can define success in a variety of different ways. You know, are students content with the experience that they had? Did people show up? But I think in the long-term pieces, it's more of an educational component and life skills component, and how do you set them up for success and how they define success.
It makes it tough because it's not just a single number that you can put in an annual report to measure things.
That's what people want.
Yeah. Well, I know that you all are using iPads to track some things. How are you using those in terms of sort of digitally assessing things?
Sure. A couple different ways. We are a student voice campus. We went through SACS accreditation probably 2 or 3 years ago, so there was a big push for all sorts of assessment data, collect anything and everything that you can. And the mobility, they started out with PDAs, and then they switched to iPods, and then once the iPads came out, we're like, okay, well, let's try the iPad approach. And so when we have captive audiences waiting in line for an autograph at a distinguished speaker event, we'll give them the iPad to give us feedback on the event, future speakers that they want to see. We typically tie learning outcomes to each one of the particular speakers, so feedback on what they learned from what the speaker was talking about. We'll walk downstairs in the university center and do the same thing on just general interest surveys, but a lot of it is outcome related in the mobility piece of it and the novelty of being able to grab onto an iPad and kind of play with it. So I think those particular pieces will be helpful. Right now we have the original iPads, and Becca's probably going to smile in just a second, but I think we need to consider grabbing an iPad 2, so you can do live on the spot video assessment. So if I'm standing in line with you, and rather than you take the real quick assessment on student voice, which is I agree, disagree, you rank on a Likert scale, and then give me I'm going to ask you a real quick question. I'm going to turn the camera on and give me 30 seconds. Tell me what you learned, or give me something about the experience that you enjoyed or that you would improve, or whatever it might be, to give you some more rich qualitative data. Instantly, rather than having them have to type it out.
Well, and the other aspect I think of immediately is you have video that you can use then to promote what you just did, because a student saying to another student, this was an awesome event and this is what I got out of it.
Sure.
It's pretty impactful.
And I think that's probably where we're weak in our office right now, is on the assessment piece, and we're getting there, but particularly with the video pieces and using that both as an assessment and a marketing tool. I think that's ripe with opportunity.
Well, speaking of marketing, I mean, are you getting students to your events? It seems like we know how it used to be. Bulletin boards were overflooded with the hot pink paper, and then everybody got their emails and newspaper ads, and then Facebook's come along now. What are you using to get students to come to things, to sort of get the word out and,
Right.
and in ways that are actually effective, because there's so much digital noise these days.
Sure. Well, we're in those digital noise places, Facebook, Twitter. The blog really isn't too much of a marketing tool necessarily, unless we have content that we want to dump there as a teaser. We've got, your usual posters. There's a student listserv that will send particular pieces out. We have wind resistant and weather resistant 28 by 38 poster frames that are ours. We've got 5 of them that we'll put out across campus. And we've got an event out. We'll go and refill those. We're in the process of getting a decal, so when we don't have an event and the posters are outdated, we'll pull the posters out, but you still see kind of branding information for our office and how to hit us up on the website and Twitter and Facebook and those particular pieces. Everybody says, I heard about it from a friend, and you ask, how many, well, you can never find that original patient zero, but if you can, I think that's the key. And we've got some great word of mouth people that work in our office. And, we know that if we've got a short notice thing coming out, that we're going to drop information to Lamar, and Lamar is going to blast it out to his folks, and it's going to go like wildfire. And there are different constituent groups across campus that we can do that with, and I think that's all about building quality relationships with students. You still need to do the traditional marketing places, having athletics promote your programs, having the Performing Arts Center drop some information during their introduction of an artist or an entertainer. But it's really about getting information on a consistent basis in the hands of students that are going to share it with their friends.
Absolutely, and it seems like the traditional marketing is what enables you to almost promote the new marketing, promote your social media efforts. You put a video up, well, people aren't going to find it unless maybe you tell them about it via a poster or one of those signs, like you said.
Right.
So I guess we've kind of touched upon marketing. What are some of the logistics for you as a director? I think a lot of folks are interested in sort of the nuts and bolts of what it's like to be in a director role for a leadership office, because it's unique in terms of a student affairs role.
Sure. I would love to swipe my desk clear of all the stuff that I need to do and focus on leadership development and leadership programs, and kind of, as I like to say, dwell in possibility on different things and really think deeply about what we're doing with leadership. And then I look at my task list and I realize that, okay, I've got a job search that I need to manage. Our ability to put forth requisitions in the system has just gone through, but now we're getting pinched financially on different things. We've got to manage the budget that way. So it's leadership by interruption, management by interruption, and trying to push that down as much as you can. And interruption management, I guess, is even a better description.
Nice.
Is how do you control that? There are days, and as much as I hate to do it, that I have to close my door. There's a mass communications class that's going on right now for this summer session, and we've had 2 groups come in. One group come in twice to do video production about our office and with us as actors.
I think the audience would love to see that someday when that goes up.
It's on Facebook, I think. It's not captioned though, so it's probably coming down.
Okay.
And the way we connected with those students originally, one of them went to leadership. But at some point they came in again today, and I just told them I couldn't do it. I don't have time to do that. And again, it's interruption management, the ability to say no and prioritize. And at some point in time, I need to get home and see my kids more than putting them to bed and kind of waving at them out the door before they get up for the day.
Yeah.
Well,
one thing I wanted to mention was I read I think it was a Facebook posting actually from Jeanette Passmore. I think she shared a link to I think it was a PDF document talking about sort of there is no such thing now as a traditional student, right? We've got students coming in, a huge percentage of students who are 24, 25 years old or older, taking classes part-time, whatnot. Situationally, the game has changed now in terms of who we're programming for, opportunities for students. How do you create opportunities for students that aren't in a cohort that we as student affairs professionals are so used to working with?
Right. I think it goes back, I talked about the synchronicity of our leadership programming and leadership in general is that you have to, in some ways, embrace the asynchronous piece of it as well. Um, Programming at different times, at different days. UNCP is a unique institution. This is the first place that I've really worked at where I've seen students with kids, even traditional age students with kids, and that's kind of thrown things off. And they don't come to programs because they don't have daycare for their students. So how do we manage that? Is there an opportunity to partner with the education department and early childhood education, those particular pieces? We're 45 minutes away from Fort Bragg, so we have a very high veteran and active military presence on campus, and working with our office over there to understand the mentality of veteran and military personnel. As Aubrey Sweat will talk to our veteran liaison, he'll talk to you about being, they want to know what they need to do, when they need to do it, and where it needs to go, and who they need to talk to. Their mentality is very regimented, and sometimes me asking you as a veteran, what do you think, and just tell me that's not how they've been kind of conditioned to operate in the world that they've come from. And it doesn't matter what I think, it's what you tell me to do. And how can we, in our language and program offerings, kind of meet that particular need for them? And we can't always just do the 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock evening program and people just wander over after dinner from their residence hall or whatever it might be. We've got to do more daytime programming. And that would probably be a challenge for us this year. This will be the first year since I've been here where we don't have an activity. We used to have an activity period on Wednesdays from 10:30 to 11:30 where there was nothing going on campus.
Oh, wow.
Academically, I think it's a complete misnomer, and and everybody tries to cram everything on campus in that 10:30 to 11:30 time. But how do we deal with commuters, adult students, veterans? We run the gamut of non-traditional students here to the point where calling them non-traditionals is inaccurate.
Yeah.
They're just a student, and that's just who they are and who we are.
Speaking of students coming into the university, what do you all do with orientation? How do you connect with orientation? Because it seems like obviously that's a sweet spot for when students come in for your office to become a known entity to them.
Right. Orientation is a unique beast here. It is run out of our enrollment services office. This is the first place that I've worked where I have not had orientation responsibility. And in some ways, that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because my summers, for the most part, are free. I come in, do a quick session for transfer students in the summer, literally 5 minutes, and then I'm done. And the curse of that is that I do a quick session for transfer students in 5 minutes, and then I'm done. And we don't get that contact time with students in the summer. I don't think it's necessarily the best time to get contact with students in the summer. I think it's more of a registration component. We are starting to grow our Welcome Week piece and engage students there. And then we've got the usual freshman seminar pieces. I don't think we're not a model for orientation. Don't follow our model for orientation. We need to overhaul. But I think it's important to understand if you do have a good orientation model, what are students' needs in the moment that they are there. They don't need to be bombarded with all the involvement opportunities when they're here in the summer. When they're here in the summer, they're here about academic survival and how do I make sure that my classes are done, my financial aid can get here, and I can get here in the door. And then once I'm in the door and I feel comfortable at home, then we can start talking about my living room at college and what do I want my living room to look like, who do I want to have come into that, who do I want to have influence my experience, and what do I want to do beyond my living room when I get out on campus and get engaged with people.
Seems like a strategic enrollment management conversation is in order in terms of how your office helps retain students.
Yes, retention's a big word on our campus. If you throw retention around, you can probably get people's ears perked up really quick and have an extended conversation that you probably would not normally be able to do.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like it's connected to the financial bottom line then a lot of times, and
Yep.
that retention percentage is usually an interesting number.
State of North Carolina ties our funding directly to our retention rate. So we've got to retain.
Absolutely. So, Mike, where are some of the places you go for professional development? Where do you go? What do you read? Who do you talk to?
Okay. Well, I've got my core group of people that I'll talk to. I refer to them as my inner circle. One of my strengths quest strengths is relator. So, and my Myers-Briggs is an I. So I don't have a whole bunch of people out there that I'm out there bouncing off of with ideas. It's more one-on-one, two-on-one kind of things, having conversations about that. So my inner circle folks, and they know who they are. I have conversations with them. Um, Twitter has actually been a really good conduit for professional development and getting connected with folks. Had a great conversation either this morning or earlier this afternoon with Chris Townsend about some leadership things and how we were talking about leadership today. I have been to LEI, Leadership Educators Institute. It's an every other year program. Won't happen this December, but it will happen next December. I would strongly encourage people to take advantage of that. That appeals to me on certainly the leadership piece, but also the relator piece because it's a smaller experience. Every summer, I think it's in June, the National Leadership Symposium is also out there. I think that's a great experience. It's one of those retreat buzz types of experiences that I talk about with students, but for professionals. You read a couple books, you go and have an immersive experience, and then hopefully you go back and kind of apply it. I think International Leadership Association is probably another one that I need to revisit. I've been there once. They alternate their conferences back and forth between in North America venue, primarily the United States, and then an international venue. So, as we see leadership kind of become more global and academically oriented, I think that's a place to gather some things. But then you've also got some other places where you can gather more skill-related pieces. NASPA's Knowledge Community, ACPA's Commission on Student Involvement, and then you've got your usual suspects of speakers that want. Anytime Susan Konabez or John Dugan talks, it's like I'm going to line up first at the door to hear what they have to say, even if I already heard it again.
Exactly. What about LinkedIn? We've talked about Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, blogs. LinkedIn gets sort of listed a lot in terms of career services, but it seems like with leadership and involvement, LinkedIn represents a really good opportunity for students to get connected to a space that's about professional networking, connecting with folks that are in similar fields or interest areas. How do you use LinkedIn, and do you think it has any place within leadership programs?
Sure. I exist on LinkedIn.
I exist.
And that's about it. Quite frankly, I added my LinkedIn account when Becca and I started doing our social media and the job search piece. We have not used it very extensively on campus as far as developing groups or those particular pieces. I think there are probably more corporate groups that we could take advantage of in their leadership development programs and conversations there that we can take information as professionals and infuse it in our work. But at least at UNC Pembroke, I'm not seeing our students gravitating there at all as a venue for that. They're just not at that place with their personal branding yet.
Yeah. Do you think that, I guess, what responsibility do we have as educators to we use the tools, but we almost, in using tools with our students, we're teaching them how to use it, and they don't realize that they're learning how to use something that could, down the road, like you said, sort of it's almost like a long tail effect of leadership.
Yep. Yeah. We try and we talk to our leadership students, particularly learning community folks, about how to utilize Facebook effectively, how to utilize Twitter effectively, and to develop and control your brand. If you're going to go and search for your name, how deep into that Google list of results can you control? Can you control the first 2 or 3, or can you control the first 2 or 3 pages? We are starting to get our students to see the value, particularly as we grow the video piece. I think, as I mentioned, the iPad 2 and the video and the marketing and the assessment piece, students like the video component and the ability to put that out on a blog, whether it's WordPress or Tumblr. I think the video piece will help people kind of grow with the blog. And then, so for our students right now, the blog is a +1. LinkedIn for them is kind of a +2 or +3 as far as a stretch is concerned. we would love to get them there. I think Mallory Bauer down the hall from us can probably talk more concretely about how that's valuable to them, but they're just not seeing it right now. It's like I think you need to start day one in the Career Center when you get on a campus, and if you can do that and kind of evolve from there, that's great.
Yeah, as opposed to saving it for the at the end.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Don't rescue me and give me a job. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's a continuum. It's an entire journey. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you were talking about some conferences, some events. What are some of your favorite books and or websites?
On occasion, Seth Godin's stuff makes me think. I enjoy that. I'm a very visual learner, so I've been known to get stuck on Pinterest every once in a while. I don't know how professionally valuable that is, but it's a fun place to go and gawk at pictures, and I probably got more recipes than I'm capable of cooking, but they certainly do look good. Dr. Brett, I cannot for the life of me remember his last name, but I enjoy his blog. He was somebody that I wrote with on Dan Chaubel's personal branding blog. I don't know if he's still there or not, but I think he's at Dr. Brett on Twitter. I'll look that up and get that out to you. But I like his perspective on things. He's a professor out west, talks about leadership and those kind of things.
Okay. Nice.
Those are kind of the three big ones, I guess, right now.
Okay, yeah, it looks like Ardith is tweeting out these links. I've never actually heard of Pinterest before, so I'll have to take a look at that one. You've got me intrigued now, I must say. You've done your job.
Start cooking.
I guess. I need to stop traveling so much. Well, Mike, anything you'd like to say to the folks who are watching, or if those of you who are watching, I know we've got some folks who are tweeting here and following the conversation. Anything you'd like to ask Mike, or Mike, again, anything you'd like to add for the show?
Yeah, I mentioned it real briefly, kind of in passing, but my perspective again is that students are developed over time through a series of meaningful experiences, and I think leadership is one of the key threads of those meaningful experiences, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're not getting so theoretical, as Chris Conson and I talked about today, that we're not getting so theoretical that we're moving beyond the developmental places of some of our younger students that need some of the core leadership skill development. But I think it can be infused in a variety of different areas, and it will continue to grow, so you kind of need to stay abreast of what's going on.
Do you think it's almost in 2011, it seems like a book or a text or an article around the long tail of leadership from a student affairs perspective could easily come out?
Sure.
Given the tools that we're using, Facebook, blogs, it's hard to measure, but it's having an impact.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think you'll see it. I think you can probably build off a variety of different pieces. The long tail effect made me think of Marcia Baxter Magolda, and her studies, kind of the long-term studies and how people are growing there. I think you'll probably see that with the multi-institutional study of leadership. I don't know if they're tracking individual students, but you can probably see some growth in the work that Susan Colomez and John Dugan and that whole Maryland crew are doing. There's a lot of rich data there that you can probably explore.
Nice. Well, I think we have enough information for another show here, for sure. Well, Mike, thanks for coming on the show. It looks like folks on the tweet stream are quieting down a little bit, so we'll do the same here. But Mike, again, seriously, man, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
And I can't wait to hear about the iPad 2 and this experiment that you're doing with it's Joe, Cindy, and Chris.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that's going to be and you're presenting that, or you've submitted that for NACA.
Yeah.
Well, they're here in Columbia, right? So I'll just go knock on the door and say this is a session that has to go through.
We appreciate the push.
We'll do. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
All right, folks. Leadership is something that I think that we could talk about it over and over again. It's fluid. It's moving. But again, I think like Mike said, that it's a continuum. You're developing things along this sort of framework. It's not going to happen overnight. And I loved what he had to say about success isn't necessarily something that happens just overnight. It takes a little while to develop. Folks, again, looks like the tweet stream is still rocking. So if you have questions or if you have any thoughts about the show, please feel free to use the SA Live hashtag in the ginormous font that we've got here. That's #SA Live. Really quickly want to promote the next show. We've got some interesting guests coming on. We've got some folks that aren't necessarily in student affairs. We've got some folks from the Big Q Ethics. This is from the Marculus Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. They're going to come on the show, and we're going to talk about ethical issues and college students. So that's going to be next week. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. We're basically just going to go through a list of ethical issues and concerns that students have and have an ethicist actually break down the ethical issues and the ramifications. So it should be a really cool show, really unique kind of show for us. So folks, as always, Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And Ardith is going to send out a tweet with that link right now. So my name's Eric Stoller, folks. We will see you again next week on another episode of Student Affairs Live. Take care.